Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Karl rner. I'm here to present second generation SD1. As you can see, based on NFV principles, I'm the product manager for ENEA NFV Access, which is a UCPE platform, virtualization platform for on-premise deployment of SD1, security, etc. Okay. Yes. So I will talk a bit about first generation, second generation SD1, talk a bit about service provider, feedback, etc., and then go into some concrete examples. So when I spoke to a service provider a couple of months ago, we discussed what their problem were or their challenges were with their existing SD1 solution. So they were in a first generation type of deployment with a single vendor SD1 solution. And they mentioned a couple of things, three things. One of the things that they were struggling with was the fact that they had to have multiple physical network appliances to deploy their service. One for SD1, one for security and firewalling, and actually two for routing. And they felt it was a big pain for them to be able to bring their solution to each branch office of the customer, because it requires a lot of engineering and and also during maintenance you had to actually send engineers to the site in some cases just to make sure that the complex installation still works. And that was a challenge that they wanted to address somehow. Another thing that they mentioned was the fact that since they have a single vendor approach, it was extremely hard for them to innovate in terms of adding more technology, because they were kind of limited to a single vendor in order to do so. And once you deploy a single vendor solution, it's quite hard to change. So they wanted to see a way of using a more flexible model for SD1, basically. And the third area that they talked about was that when they approach a market, which in this case was a whole country, so their market was a whole country, there's a number of different market segments that they want to address. And in their segments, there was a number of customers. And these days, customers have a quite strong demand on what the SD1 services they buy should include. And it's not the same within all market segments among all customers. So they wanted to enable a way of bringing multiple solutions under the same umbrella to different customers, to be able to address a full market and also to be able to bring more value to their customers. So the second generation SD1, the multi-vendor approach to SD1, solves this problem actually. So when you use the UCPE deployment for the branch office, you deploy a virtualized infrastructure on each branch office, and it's a single box with a simple installation procedure, and on that box you run the whatever services that the customer decided to run on that branch office. It could be things like SD1, it can be firewalling, it can be session border controllers, IoT gateways, all depending on what the customer actually wants to do. And with this infrastructure in place, there's a lot of flexibility for the service provider to not only bring the service to the customer in a very smooth fashion, but also adapt the service for the customer over time, and also adapt their offering to the market over time, because they have the ability to deploy their services on a generic infrastructure. And this is really what the SD1, second generation SD1 is all about, the ability to open up the deployments and add a level of flexibility for the service provider so that they can differentiate in the market with their offerings and evolve their offerings in the market when they see new customer demand, when there is new technology available, etc. And how do we do this? So in ENEA we have been working with NFV infrastructure and NFVI type of implementations for a long time. And for the UCPE, it's not necessarily the ETSI NFV standard, but we are using the same principles as within NFV to build UCPE solutions for the market. So here is a picture that most of you have seen before about what's included in the NFVI. If we look at what's on the customer premise, It's basically three simple things that you want to deploy. First off, you want to have a white box. The white box provides the base hardware layer. It's generic, so you can pick and choose whatever white box you like. You have the virtualization platform, which basically allows you to run whatever services and manage the infrastructure and networking needed for the services. And then you have the on-premise VNFs, SD-WAN, firewall, etc., deployed at the same place. And for the management, you have a centralized management somewhere in the cloud or somewhere in a central location where you manage the box after it's been deployed for the first time. The UCP manager, it manages the life cycle of the deployment, basically taking care of things like software upgrades, alarms, etc., these kind of things, and also the deployment of VNFs, so onboarding of VNFs, base configuration of VNFs, and the deployment of the VNFs. In this picture, we also see VNF managers and SD-WAN controllers. These are connected to or part of the VNFs that we deploy on the platform and part of the vendor's offering. And they are running separate or independent of the management system or parallel with it. And on top of all of it, we have the service orchestration, OSS, BSS, all of this in the cloud. And this gives the service provider ability to manage big deployments from a central location without sending engineers to each branch office for maintenance and installation. So when you want to build a second generation SD-WAN, one of the things that's kind of challenging is the fact that most of the times there's a legacy. You probably use an SD-WAN vendor already, and you want to be able to keep all the knowledge and all the scripting and all the automation connected to that specific SD-WAN solution. And with a second generation SD-WAN, that's entirely possible because pretty much all the SD-WAN vendors, they also provide VNF-based solutions for the SD-WAN deployments. So if you have the UCPE, you can keep on running whatever SD-WAN vendor you prefer, also in the next stage. But you have the ability to pick and choose new technologies connected to SD-WAN in parallel. Even you can, for instance, decide to have a different firewalling, etc. But you can also decide to have different SD-WAN vendors, startup SD-WAN vendors that brings new, interesting things into the technology and the packaging of SD-WAN. So two examples here is a tunnel-free branch-to-branch connectivity. That's one of the startup VNF vendors' values. Another one is to bring an entirely open source-based SD-WAN solution. And in that case, you have a completely different business model that can be appealing for certain types of deployment. And all of this is made available when you have UCPE deployed at the branch office because it's all available and it's all generic. So one person that, or one company, Claven Research, completely got this message also, and they wrote another article about this, connected to Industry 4.0. So they talked about what service providers need to do within this market to differentiate and be profitable. And here they also talk about market segments, different types of customers, different types of scenarios, and you need to be able to, as a service provider, to really adapt your offering to each customer's needs. And it can be things like, yes, we want to have this specific brand, or we want to have this price point, we want to have this capacity, etc. And this is exactly what we see in a general way within the SD-WAN market. As service providers need to be able to bring this variety to their customers in order to stay competitive. If we go into more of a implementation view per se, I think this picture illustrates what the service provider brings and how it relates to the customer. So on the left side, you see a number of SD-WAN building blocks. We have white boxes, you have the virtualization implementations, you have the different VNFs, and different orchestration solutions. All these can, of course, be used by the end customer and the enterprise themselves if they have the skill set and put together the solution themselves. But that's quite rare. Most of the enterprises want to have something that's well packaged. That's why they go to the service providers. And the service providers need to take all these building blocks and create service configurations or solutions to each customer segments. So here I illustrate with a number of different segments and customers. It can, of course, be different depending on what the service provider wants to bring to the market. But in essence, the service provider takes the building blocks and put them into different reference configurations or ready-to-deploy configurations, and that's what they're offering to the market in a consistent way. And this is the way that you bring differentiation to the customers. So if we look at these examples, what can be different? Apart from just having different brands of VNFs, different brands of white boxes, etc. in the solutions. There are things like security. Some markets want to have more higher level of security. There can be things like performance, reliability. It can be different features that you want to bring in, etc., etc. And this is not just something that is a one-off type of configuration. It has to be able to evolve over time. So even though the customer has a one sense or one idea about what they need day one, this has to be able to change over time. And this is how you do it. With this layered approach and the fact that you have multiple vendors, you can actually evolve the solution and keep making the customer happy. On top of all this, as I wrote here, the orchestration and automation is a generic layer on top of these different configurations. This is our view of how it's supposed to be done. So the service providers, they want to have a common layer for administering the system, administering the customers. And this is also, of course, a key to be able to have a one orchestration layer that can provide support for many different configurations like this. So once the deployment is done and the customer has reached a certain level of connectivity and it's all working, the customer wants to evolve their solution. And with the second generation SD-WAN, we have multiple layers to play with. And you can see, we are back with the building blocks. So all of a sudden, you keep making these building blocks available for the end customer to pick and choose from and to configure. So you can do things like changing the white box vendor or changing the capacity of the white box. You can replace the virtualization layer with a different vendor for certain features, for instance. And you can start working with adding VNFs or modifying the VNF in terms of configuration or replacing VNFs in order to keep cost and also to keep supporting the customer different needs. So CMC Networks is one of our customers that approach this second generation type of deployment in their way. So CMC is a wholesale SD-WAN, managed SD-WAN provider. They target the whole African continent and Middle East. And what they do is that they provide SD-WAN and security services to the entire continent. And they need to be able to support many different types of service configurations. So here in the picture, you can see illustration of that. You have a customer that wants to use a customer portal. And this customer portal is available to them for doing basic configurations of their service and also to add more services to their existing deployments. On the customer premise, you have the white box, the ENEA NFV access virtualization platform, and a number of VNFs running. And the service providers keep on working on their services catalog and solutions for their customer to evolve them and stay relevant for the users. So some conclusions around this. So we see right now that the market is moving into second generation SD-WAN. A lot of the service providers, they show a lot of interest to get there. They want to see this openness, the fact that they can include more and new technologies into their solutions from day one and over time in order to evolve their offerings. There is a market out there, and the enterprises in the market, they demand this. They want to be able to choose these different configurations and be able to do fine-grained selections of features, capacities, etc. So it's up to the service provider to be able to support this demand. And the service providers, there's a lot of them out there, and they need to stay competitive. And one way to do that is to be able to differentiate the offerings for different customers. And that's what we see right now, that this is the step that the managed service providers take. We also see that the technology is there. We see the building blocks, all the building blocks that I've discussed. There's a lot of different vendors providing building blocks to build these kind of solutions, and there's more and more added all the time. So the technology is there. It's just a matter of putting it together for the customers and by the service providers. So second generation SD-WAN is really happening now. And this is also great to see that the service providers have gotten this and stay on this track. So I talked in the beginning, I said I'm the product manager for ENEA NFV Access. So ENEA NFV Access is a virtualization platform. And our philosophy is that we don't want to be a hardware vendor. We don't want to be a VNF vendor, orchestration vendor. We just want to stay within our layer and enable second generation SD-WAN solutions. And by doing so, we have a very large and open ecosystem of white box vendors, VNF vendors, orchestration vendors that can be used to build these different solutions for the market. In the ENEA booth, we have another implementation of second generation SD-WAN that I think is quite interesting. Here we are using open source components to build an SD-WAN solution. So as you can see in the picture, we are using a white box from rner. We are running our virtualization platform in the NFV Access on it. And on there, we use pfSense and FlexiWAN open source VNFs to bring in a service that consists of security and firewalling with the pfSense and SD-WAN with FlexiWAN. All managed from a central location with a UCPE manager and an SD-WAN controller from FlexiWAN. And this is the type of innovation we see when we start working with startup kind of SD-WAN vendors that bring something new into the market. And this is really enabled by the fact that you can pick and choose your configurations, your solution, and components when building this type of environments. So we have this demo. We are demonstrating it in the ENEA booth. You can see the information there. And you're, of course, welcome to take a look and talk to us. And I think that's the final slide. So if there are any questions, I'm available for that as well.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.